Welcome into the 2024 schedule reaction show. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. One of our favorite days of the year.
It is.
Not just because it determines our entire life for about half of the year, but we know all of the Bucs fans have been so excited to see when, where, what time all these matchups are going to be happening.
The happiest people on earth right now are the travel coordinators for every NFL team.
Or the unhappiest as they frantically start working very hard. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with some initial takeaways, look at some of the primetime games, and then we're going to go block by block looking through the schedule at some of the big matchups. So let's start with those initial takeaways for you as you just first looked at it. What came to your mind?
Seemed like a pretty balanced schedule. 3 of the first 4 games at home, so maybe a chance to get off to a good start there. You don't at any point have more than 2 road or 2 home games in a row. The late bye week, week 11, is nice. You never know for sure when a bye week is going to be great, but generally you'd like to see it later. There is kind of an unusual stretch, and actually this happened last year too. From week 9 to week 16, that's an 8-week stretch. The Bucs only play 2 games at Raymond James Stadium because there's 5 road games in there plus the bye week. So that part could be a little hard to navigate, but what it means is that the last 2 weeks you got home games against division opponents, New Orleans and Carolina, and if the division race is close, that could really be an advantage.
Yeah, that would be really
What
important.
about you? What did you see?
Yeah, I felt the same way, and I felt like especially even just not having a division game for a little while, I kind of like that. I like the idea of getting your feet under you with some games that maybe aren't as important to what they will ultimately mean for the playoff race. That see, especially when you have a new offensive coordinator, some new pieces. I like that idea of having a few games before you get into a division opponent. But yeah, and I loved that there weren't these incredible stretches of 4 road games in a row or things that just you're always like, wait, what? And yeah, late bye week. We were just talking before the show that I don't remember many times, maybe one in my entire stretch here.
It was very helpful in the Super Bowl year.
That is very accurate. So we're going to hope that's a good sign for this year. All right, so let's talk also about primetime games. That was one of the things that I noticed as well when I took a look at it is I remember there being years past where it's like you had one Thursday night game or you had one primetime game, and that even last year everybody talked about the disrespect.
Because there were 2.
Because there were only 2.
Yeah.
Well, we do not have that problem this year. We have a few more than that.
It had gone for pretty much the maximum of 5 every year when Tom Brady was here. Tom Brady leaves, they go down to 2. Nobody had much hopes in the Buccaneers, but I think this is an indication that the Bucs have at least impressed on somebody, the schedule makers at least, that they are for real. So we're back to having 4 primetime games, 1 on Thursday, which most, if not every team has, but 2 Monday nighters and a Sunday nighter. I'm really personally very excited about that last one, the Sunday night game against Dallas in week 16.
Yeah, that's going to be
in
great.
Dallas. We've had some really nice primetime games with the Cowboys in recent years. Then they beat us in the playoffs, so it's kind of turned into a pretty good rivalry.
I agree. And something else we didn't mention is there are no holiday games. That was something we weren't sure about because there'd been all these reports of on Christmas there's going to be these games on a Wednesday, and Thanksgiving you just never know that the Bucs are not a holiday game, which again people who travel are kind of happy about probably.
Right. Well, we play at Dallas and at Detroit, and we haven't been on Thanksgiving since 2006, so I personally thought there was a good shot.
There was a good chance. That didn't happen.
But the other games, in case we should probably mention them for the primetime games, are Thursday in week 5, which is what you talked about, the first division game. And then we have Baltimore at home in week 7 on Monday Night Football, and then at Kansas City in week 9 on Monday night, and that's obviously a rematch of Super Bowl 55.
Yeah, and something else we talked about, not a ton of cold weather threat games, which you kind of always worry about in terms of knowing that's not exactly our strong suit to prepare for. Down here you don't have any things like a Green Bay or a Chicago in late December. That the closest thing is you have a Giants game in late November.
Yeah.
But that's about it. That really this isn't a schedule you're too worried about.
Half the road games are in domes.
In domes as well, which is always going to be interesting to see. Okay, so let's go kind of section by section here and highlight a few more things that you notice in each of these blocks. So this first grouping, we have Washington Commanders at home to open, and then you have the home game against the Detroit Lions. You've got the Broncos, you've got the Eagles.
Right.
So tell me the things that stand out to you.
Well, the first thing that jumps out to me is in that first month, you have a rematch of both of the Buccaneers playoff games from last year.
At Detroit was what I'm looking at.
So we played at Detroit in the playoffs. We played at home against Philly. We get a rematch of both of those games in the same locations in the first month, which is pretty interesting. We could take a quick look at a couple of these teams before maybe looking a little closer at 2 of them. Washington, the leadoff, obviously the fun thing there, the big storyline will be Jaden Daniels' regular season debut, the 2nd pick in the draft. Heisman Trophy winner, and a dual threat quarterback, which the Buccaneers are actually going to see several times early on with Philadelphia and also Baltimore. So it's their first chance to go against a dual threat, and first chance to be the first defense to see how hard is it to contain Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. And it is an interesting reminder, as you brought up some of these teams like the Eagles and the Ravens. the Bucs have that first place schedule. You know, that as we've looked at these opponents, that because the Bucs won the division, this is what we've seen the last few years. This is the fun thing about it, and also helps with the primetime stuff.
Yeah.
They are facing a lot of tough teams because of the fact that they have what's called that first place schedule.
And then Denver in week 3, that'll be kind of fun because you'll have Bo Nix, Troy Franklin, and our Bucky Irving all from that prolific Oregon offense together in the field together. But I think really the ones that stand out to me are Detroit and Philadelphia, if we want to take a closer look at that.
I agree. That Detroit game was so fun, even though it didn't turn out the way the Bucs fans wanted. It was a great matchup, really entertaining game. And I love that they get a chance to try to get a little revenge there very early in the season when it still feels a little fresher. If you played them like in December, it's like by then a whole other season has almost happened. So I like that it's early where that game's probably still pretty fresh.
Well, Jared Goff just got the bag, right?
He just
did. And he threw for 287 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game, including the final TD that ended up being the winning score to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who also got a big new contract. But Baker Mayfield threw for 349 yards and 3 TDs in that game as well, and really led a spirited comeback and had the Bucs tied going into the fourth quarter. So that was an exciting game to remember. Now, they've done a little bit to beef up their defensive front. They added DJ Reader for the interior and Marcus Davenport. You combine that with Aiden Hutchinson, who's obviously already a young star off the edge, and that's a pretty big challenge. Maybe, trying to think of a matchup there. Cody Mauch has to now deal with that beefier interior line there. Aiden Hutchinson obviously is a tough battle for anybody, either side, whichever tackle he's going against. And for the second year in a row, of course, the Lions reworked their cornerback spot. They're trying to get that right.
That was a great I really enjoyed watching that shot of Cody, fighting with him, showing all the hand movements and everything. That was pretty perfect timing there.
Right. So we all know the Lions have a new cornerback in Carlton Davis from the Bucs trade to him. They also used their first-round pick on Terrion Arnold. So you wonder what will that battle look like between Carlton Davis and some of his former teammates like Chris Godwin. Who's going to get the best of those, and who's going to be more fired up for that match. Nobody really wanted to see Carlton Davis leave, but now he is on the other side.
Yeah, and there's some fun in that.
Yeah, so the Eagles, obviously, that's the rematch last year. They were struggling at the end. The Buccaneers beat them pretty handily in the playoffs and have done so several times in recent years in the playoffs. But and they've also handled Jalen Hurts pretty well, but that doesn't make it any easier. Jalen Hurts is still a guy that can hurt you with both his arm and his legs. Again, the Buccaneers have had a good game plan under Todd Bowles for Jalen Hurts, but that doesn't mean you're going to contain him every time. So that's a big challenge there. Also, the Eagles defense now has former Buccaneer Devin White in the middle of it.
That is going to be a lot of fun to watch. Same thing where it's whenever you're playing against guys that you're familiar with, friends, former teammates, it adds a little extra juice.
I think Devin White will be a little fired up for this game.
He'll be a little
and
fired
if you obviously recall, one of the best things he did as a Buccaneer was blitzing. He's so good at blitzing, especially up the middle, so all our interior linemen are going to have to be aware of that.
On their P's and Q's.
Well, Graham Barton probably going to be the starting center. He's going to have to worry about that. Yes. And then Philly also used two of their picks, their first two picks on cornerbacks, in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. So that's more of a challenge potentially. Maybe it's an opportunity for veteran receivers like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to have the upper hand against the rookies, especially early in the season.
Yep. All right. So let's look at that next block. So this features the Falcons, Saints, Ravens, Falcons.
Yeah.
So, boy, we're going to get a lot of Kirk Cousins, and the Falcons are, I'm assuming Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
For that draft. So tell me some of your initial thoughts.
Well,
it starts with your first division game, and it's on a Thursday night, your first primetime game as well.
Like you said, 2 Atlanta games in that 4-game block. You usually don't get them that close together, but the storyline here is the Buccaneers have won this division 3 years in a row, and the year before that they won the Super Bowl, and yet the Falcons get Kirk Cousins, and every odds maker in the country is making them the clear favorites to win the division. And I get it, because it is a talented roster, and Kirk Cousins has been a good quarterback throughout his year, but this is going to be the opportunity. This month is where we'll see, are they right? And the Buccaneers really aren't contenders, even though they've won 3 in a row, and Atlanta's going to walk away with this division, or can the Bucs make a statement in this month? So Atlanta, of course, they added Kirk Cousins. They have new coaching staff under our friend Raheem Morris, a new OC in Zach Robinson. So we'll see how that changes how they utilize all those weapons they drafted early in recent years, Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson. It felt like they were a little underused in the Arthur Smith offense, but with with a new quarterback and a new coordinator, that could be a lot different. And then also, whenever you play the Falcons, you have to think about Mike Evans because he usually goes off against the Falcons.
That he does.
He has nearly 80 yards per game and has scored 11 touchdowns in 18 games against the Falcons. So usually he does quite well.
Incredible. And yeah, so not only 2 games against the Falcons, you also have the Saints thrown in there. So 3 out of the 4 of this block are division opponents. And then the other one to round it out is none other than the Baltimore Ravens, who look pretty stacked.
Yeah. Well, just quickly on the Saints, they kind of have a new look offensive line. They used their first-round pick on Talisi Fuaga. I think it's Talisi. Ryan Ramczyk, their great right tackle, may not be able to play because of a knee injury. So, and then also, of course, whenever you play the Saints, it's Mike Evans versus Marshawn Lattimore. So, but yeah, a closer look at Baltimore. That's another really mobile quarterback, the most mobile quarterback, the reigning MVP, 2-time MVP now. And they have the former Bucs OC, Todd Monken, as their OC, and obviously that went well last year because Lamar Jackson won MVP and they made it to the AFC Championship game. They also now, their offense should be a lot more diverse with, they signed Derrick Henry. With all those running backs moving around the league during the offseason, Derrick Henry to the Ravens was, to me, the most interesting one.
That is going to be really interesting. Yeah, they're an interesting team to watch, and it is going to be a home game, which is a lot of fun, and a primetime game.
Monday Night Football,
feel like.
Yeah.
And that's a team that, because they're AFC, you don't get here
True.
very often. And I always think that's a lot of fun when you get a chance to face some teams that are not your usual opponents here. Yeah. I think that's going to be a really
I just think that's a scary thought with the threat of Lamar Jackson running, or you can hand it off to Derrick Henry. So,
yeah.
And obviously their young safety Kyle Hamilton emerged as a star last year. I think he and Antoine Winfield and Jesse Bates, they were kind of all in the running for All-Pro. Of course, Antoine got it. But.
Yes, as we all know, he deserved. We are not biased at all, but we all know he deserved that. Okay, so let's take a look at this next block here. This is going to include our bye week. So the 4 games in a bye week we'll take a look at. You have the Chiefs on Monday night on the road. You have the 49ers here at home. Then you have your bye week. You have the Giants and the Panthers. So both on the road as well. So in this block, you have your bye week. This starts that stretch you were talking about where there's not a lot of home games. You have that bye week thrown in there. And so several road games, very few home games. It's just the one home game against the 49ers in this block. Tell me what stands out to you.
Well, just a couple real quick thoughts on the Giants and the Panthers before we look a little closer at the other 2 games. The Giants, they're still trying to find out if Daniel Jones is the quarterback of the future. Is this his last chance? They gave him Malik Neighbors with the 6th overall pick, so that'll be a good opportunity because he hasn't really had great weapons in his attempts to really solidify himself as their starting quarterback. But also, that New York Giants front line could be really difficult to deal with after they traded for Brian Burns. And then you have the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, the big storyline there is Dave Canales is now their head coach, and after he helped resurrect the careers of Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, can he do the same thing with Bryce Young?
Yes.
But the more exciting matchups here are obviously potential Super Bowl teams in both conferences. Obviously, the Chiefs have won the last 2, so you got to consider them Super Bowl favorites going into the season. The Buccaneers beat the Chiefs memorably in Super Bowl 55 at the end of the 2020 season and really contained Patrick Mahomes in that offense. They've continued to succeed despite the fact that they have had a somewhat unimpressive wide receiver core, Travis Kelce notwithstanding, but they signed or traded for, I can't remember which, Marquise Brown, and then drafted Xavier Worthy. So they added a whole lot of speed to that team. And with all that speed on the outside, that's probably going to help Travis Kelce be even more effective. Because there were times last year where he seemed to be finally in a little bit of decline, but you saw in the playoffs he's still a major weapon. So that's a team that, that's obviously a huge challenge for our defense. And then their defense, they were able to re-sign Chris Jones, which they really needed because even with Chris Jones, their run defense was a little porous last year. Their pass defense was quite good. So this might be an opportunity for the Bucs duo of Rashad White and Bucky Irving to get something done and try to keep that Chiefs offense off the field as much as possible.
Yeah, I find this stretch fascinating. When I first looked at the schedule of where you have the Ravens, Chiefs, and 49ers all within 4 games. And then the one in the middle there is the team that people are picking to win the division.
That's quite a stretch.
That is quite a stretch right there. But then how nice that that's right when your bye week falls. I feel like that's really great in terms of separate even just from like where in the schedule time-wise of, you want it to be late because there's a chance you have more injuries then. I just like that stretch. that could be a pretty, just even emotionally draining stretch of where you're playing all these #1 teams, and it's the hype, and you got some primetime games thrown in there as well. Like, that's just going to be a tough stretch physically as well. These are physical teams. I feel like we could not have asked for a more perfect spot to put that bye week.
You kind of get a breather from the stretch run like they did in 2020.
Yes, yeah, which could be really big. Anything else from that block
you wanted to hit on? Let's move on to the last one.
Last block here. So we have this is kind of the way we had the stretch with multiple division opponents towards the end of the first half of the schedule. You have it again here where you've got your multiple matchups against the Panthers, and you've got your other Saints matchup here to close it out. But then you have your Raiders game, which is going to be interesting, and your Chargers. So again, a few other teams that are not typically seen on the Bucs schedule as well. And then you talked about earlier that Cowboys game on Sunday night is late in the season when that's become a bit of a late season rivalry.
Yeah.
That's going to be a fun one. What stands out to you about this last stretch?
Well, we've already talked about the Panthers. Just quick on the Las Vegas Raiders. They drafted Brock Bowers, so that adds a whole new dimension to their defense. How big of a weapon is he going to be? Usually rookie tight ends are not very prolific, but we saw a couple of them do a real good job last year, and this guy just has unbelievable open field moves and ability to pick up yards after the catch. I mean, look at this. So the good thing for the Buccaneers is they have a guy like Levante David, who's been one of the best pass defending linebackers of the last decade. And then you look at the New Orleans Saints, who we haven't talked about yet. I don't think. We did. Yeah. So we can move on and take a closer look at the Chargers and the Cowboys. First, the Chargers. The big story there, of course, is their new head coach is Jim Harbaugh, and Jim Harbaugh has had instant success in San Francisco. Just won a national championship with Michigan. I'm pretty sure everybody thinks that Jim Harbaugh is a difference maker. And what kind of difference is he going to make? Well, they talked all the way up to the draft about how they wanted to build through the trenches, and then true to his word, he didn't take, like Malik Neighbors at number 5, he didn't trade down with somebody that wanted a quarterback. He took the top offensive tackle, Joe Alt, to pair with Rashawn Slater, and so that's going to be a test for guys like Yaya Diaby and Joe Tryon-Shank and Chris Braswell, the new outside linebacker for the Buccaneers. So the Chargers could look a lot different. Now, they're still going to throw the ball plenty. They have Justin Herbert. It's not like they're not going to throw, but I think they'll be more balanced and be able to run the ball when they need to. The other storyline for the Chargers is that they traded Keenan Allen. They cut Mike Williams, all because of salary cap reasons, and they're really kind of a little barren at wide receiver, but they did use a high second-round pick on Ladd McConkey, so he's a really good slot receiver, or at least he was at Georgia. So that could be a good battle between if Tyke Smith, for instance, wins he also from Georgia, so they played each other in practice many times. That could be an interesting battle if Tyke Smith wins the slot corner job.
And I do think it's interesting that typically every year there is a division opponent where you end up facing twice later in the season, that just the way it all shakes out. And I do think it's interesting that it's the Panthers where you have Dave Canales and you have several of the other, staffers he took with him, that there's a lot of familiarity there on both sides. And I just think that's going to be a really interesting way to close out the season, of that being the division opponent. We play late in there with all that familiarity. I think that's going to be a fun storyline.
And we should know by, what's the first game, December 1st? We should know by then how well Dave Canales and his staff have helped Bryce Young take his game to another level. Because remember, we're talking about the first overall pick in last year's draft. So there's a lot of talent there. The rookie season didn't go well, but that's obviously the point. Now, the final game we wanted to talk about here, and we tease it a little bit, is the Dallas Cowboys. Like I said, I think this has turned into kind of a nice little rivalry. I could tell you early in Buccaneers history, Cowboys-Bucs was not a rivalry. It was very one-sided, but things are a lot different now, and the Buccaneers have beaten them in several primetime games in recent years. And then, as I said before, the Cowboys got a little bit of revenge in the 22 playoffs with their win at Raymond James Stadium. And the big thing here is Dak Prescott's in a contract year. He can get out. There's no he can't be franchise tagged, so he can take the highest bid next year. So he's going to want to put up big numbers, which he did last year. CeeDee Lamb also in a contract year and coming off a 135 catch season, 135 catches.
Outrageous.
So, that's obviously a challenge for our defense.
Your top 2 offensive producers are in contract years.
They're motivated,
they're
right?
motivated. That'll be very fun. And again, every time you get a primetime game against them, you know it's getting all the attention.
Yeah.
And I love that, to be able to know that the Bucs are going to be able to, on that kind of stage late in the season. That's what you want. You want these primetime games in December, getting all the attention to show the world. And again, I think the Bucs, coming off of last year where we talked about there was such that drop in primetime games, and there was the storyline was how disrespected they were by national media, by outside people, and everybody inside didn't have that feeling. They all knew they had a chance to do what they did last year. Now I feel like this is the year to prove again. You got all these guys back. You've had a great draft class to show the world that, like, this wasn't a fluke. You're here. You're ready to go.
It reminds me very much of the 2000 game in late December against the St. Louis Rams, the greatest show on turf Rams. And that was those two teams had a bit of a rivalry going at that point. And then this was a huge game that had a lot of playoff implications late. And any Buc fans that have been around for a while remember that game as an incredible shootout. That's one of the most famous regular season games in team history. So both these teams have the chance to have really prolific offenses. So we might see another exciting night like that. And that game was also on a Monday night like this one.
I like it. I like it. Well, man, this is going to be a fun season. I can feel it. Thank you so much for tuning into this schedule release show. We hope you enjoy the entire year and hope to see you at as many games as possible.